The night settles gently over Brooklyn, wrapping the streets in a muted haze of amber streetlights. Cars drift by like quiet thoughts. A distant siren hums somewhere far away, not sharp enough to disturb the stillness, only soft enough to remind you that the city never fully sleeps. And in that quiet space begins the story of a man unlike any other in the American underworld. A man who believed he could reshape the rules, rewrite the traditions, and bring an ancient secret society into the daylight. Tonight, you will drift slowly into the life of Joe Colombo, the Don who tried to go public. Bensonhurst in the 1920s was not a place of loud headlines or dramatic scenes. It was a neighborhood of murmurs, shop doors that chimed softly, women leaning out of windows to talk across the alleyways, and young boys chasing each other down narrow sidewalks. On one such street, lined with bakeries and corner stores, a boy named Joseph Colombo grew up listening to the steady heartbeat of Italian immigrant life. The smell of tomato sauce drifting from open kitchen windows, the clatter of shoes on pavement after Sunday Mass, the low-tuned music of mandolins and laughter from stoops. In those days, Joe was not the kind of child who drew attention. He was quiet, observant, with thoughtful eyes that always seemed to be studying the world around him. People noticed his calmness. His teachers said he had a patient nature, something rare in restless young boys. His father, Anthony Colombo, had a reputation. Not something openly discussed, but whispered in calm, careful tones. People mentioned his name with a certain respect. The elder Colombo moved in circles that didn't appear in newspapers, circles that rarely wrote things down, circles that preferred agreements sealed with a nod rather than a handshake. Joe, as a child, didn't understand the significance of this. He only knew that men visited his home in the evenings, speaking quietly at the kitchen table, and that his father always told him, "Joey, watch everything, but speak very little." And so he did. When Joe grew older, tragedy arrived softly, like a cloud sliding over the sun. His father passed away unexpectedly, leaving the Colombo home quieter than ever before. Joe was barely a teenager, but he carried the loss like a grown man. He took small jobs, plugging leaks, lifting crates, cleaning sidewalks, anything to support his mother and siblings. He wasn't ambitious in the loud, pushy way. He was steady, patient, dependable. The neighborhood noticed. Years rolled on. While other boys chased big dreams or quick money, Joe stayed grounded. He worked in factories, then in shipyards, then as a longshoreman. He learned the rhythm of honest labor, the groan of machinery, the clink of metal, the slow ache in the arms after long hours. And yet, every environment he entered, people naturally gravitated toward him. He had a calmness that made others trust him. He listened more than he spoke, and when he finally did speak, his words felt measured and reassuring. These qualities did not go unnoticed by men who valued loyalty, steady hands, and quiet ambition. Men who operated in the spaces his father once walked. One evening, while Joe was closing up after a shift repairing refrigeration units, he received a visit. 3 men approached him, well-dressed, polite, moving with a certain ease that revealed they were no strangers to power. They didn't threaten him. They didn't pressure him. They simply said, "Your father did right by us, and we believe his son can do the same." Joe was not fooled. He understood exactly who they were, associates of the underworld his father once moved within. But he wasn't afraid. He had grown up on the edge of that world. It didn't feel foreign to him. It was as familiar as the scent of fresh bread on 18th Avenue. The men spoke about opportunities. Small ones, they said. Legal ones, they added. Something to get you started. And so Joe did what he always did. He listened carefully. He spoke little, and he accepted quietly. He wasn't recruited with ceremony. There was no pledge, no dramatic moment. His entry into that life was gentle, almost ordinary, like stepping into a neighborhood shop he had walked past his entire life. In the years that followed, Joe Colombo became known for something unusual in mob circles. He made people feel calm. He wasn't a hothead. He wasn't unpredictable. He didn't rush into anything. Instead, he approached every situation with a calm, steady voice, as if he were trying to soothe a restless ocean. Men twice his age found themselves confiding in him. Younger men looked up to him as a model of how to move quietly and respectfully. He handled disputes like a seasoned diplomat. He solved problems without raising his voice. He made peace where others expected violence. And in a world where small gestures carried great weight, Joe's gentle way earned him deep trust. By the late 1950s, he had moved up quietly through the ranks, not by force, not by fear, but by simply being someone everyone could rely on. What made Joe different from others in the underworld was not just his calmness. It was his belief that life didn't need to be built on fear. He believed in community. He believed in family. He believed in protecting the neighborhoods he grew up in. And, most unusually of all, he believed the Mafia could exist without being hidden from the public. He imagined something no one else did, a world where Italian Americans weren't automatically linked to organized crime, and where men like him didn't need to operate in the shadows. This belief was not loud or boastful. It was quiet, steady, an idea that simmered in the back of his mind like a pot left warm on a stove. He didn't know it yet, but this idea, this gentle dream, would shape the rest of his life, and it would lead him down a path unlike any dawn before him. The turning point in Joe's life came unexpectedly. A high-ranking figure in his crime family was arrested on a major charge. The family needed someone calm, trustworthy, and respected to step in temporarily. Someone who could keep the peace, reassure the men, handle the business quietly, and almost every man in the room turned their eyes to Joe. It wasn't because he fought the most. It wasn't because he was feared. It was because in a world full of storms, Joe Colombo was the nearest thing to a safe harbor. He accepted the role reluctantly but responsibly, and in the months that followed, he proved himself more capable than anyone expected. Soon, the temporary role became permanent, and the Colombo family, one of the 5 great families of New York, would eventually take his name. The city outside continues to settle into the softness of night. Cars whisper down distant streets. A gentle hum floats in the air, and Joe Colombo's story has only just begun. In this first chapter, you've seen the quiet rise of a man who never wanted to be feared, who never wanted to be hidden, who wanted the world to see his people and himself clearly. Little did he know, the path ahead would challenge everything he believed. And in the next part, we will drift deeper into his unusual rule, his calm leadership, and the moment he became a Don unlike any other. The night lingers over New York like a quiet blanket, tucking the corners around every street, every building, every life moving beneath the dim glow of street lamps. Somewhere in the city, a radio murmurs old Italian songs. A taxi glides across a wet road, leaving behind a thin line of reflections. And in that peaceful darkness, we drift deeper into the story of a man reshaping an underworld that rarely changed. This is the calm and steady beginning of Joe Colombo's unusual reign. When Joe Colombo stepped into leadership, the criminal world expected noise. Shakeups, power struggles, shifting alliances. Dons rising to power often brought storms with them. But Joe brought silence. Not the cold silence of fear, but the gentle silence of steady leadership. He didn't pound tables. He didn't bark orders. He didn't demand loyalty. Instead, he built it. Slowly, thoughtfully, one conversation at a time. Older men in the family watched him carefully, expecting impatience from the young Don. But Joe approached leadership like a craftsman. Each decision carved with care, each word spoken softly, each problem handled with calm logic. He drank espresso with the oldest captains, listening more than speaking. He visited the neighborhoods, both the respectable ones and the forgotten ones, never rushed, never too busy, and he made every man under him feel like their voice mattered. In a world driven by pride, Joe Colombo was a quiet, unusual presence. Within weeks of Joe taking the reins, something began to shift through the ranks. Troubles that had lingered for years began to settle. Old tensions eased, rivalries cooled, not because Joe forced them to, but because he restarted something simple: communication. He held calm, civil meetings where every man could speak without fear of an outburst. He used patience as his strategy, absorbing frustrations and offering practical solutions. He reminded everyone that their strength came not from noise but from unity. And the men responded. Some said Joe made them feel like the old neighborhood days, when people helped each other, shared meals, looked after widows, supported the little shops, and kept the streets peaceful. Joe didn't bring the family power through threats. He brought it through stability, something more valuable than fear. Most mafia families of the era stayed hidden from the world, leaning into secrecy like a shield. But under Joe's leadership, the Colombo family felt open. Not openly criminal, but deeply rooted in community. Joe encouraged his captains to support neighborhood businesses, sponsor youth programs, and quietly help struggling families. Not for publicity, just because it felt right. He believed a family that gave back earned more loyalty than one that demanded loyalty. And his belief proved true. Neighborhoods where Colombo influence had weakened started showing renewed respect. People spoke of Joe warmly, saying, "He's different. He listens. He cares about the community." This warmth did not go unnoticed by the other crime families, who watched Joe carefully. Some viewed his approach with curiosity. Others viewed it with suspicion. The mafia world valued silence, secrecy, tradition. Joe was still respectful, but he had ideas that drifted toward daylight. He believed in protecting his people, not by hiding them, but by elevating them. And that belief was about to take form in an unexpected way. It was a quiet afternoon in early spring, the kind where the sun warms the sidewalks but a cool breeze carries the smell of the Atlantic across the city. Joe was seated at a small table in an Italian cafe, sipping coffee, thinking deeply. Across the street, he saw a group of young Italian Americans being questioned by police. Not because they did anything wrong, just because they fit a profile. Joe watched silently, his eyes soft, thoughtful. Then he whispered something to himself. This has to change. In that moment, the idea that had simmered inside him since childhood suddenly took shape. His father's warnings, the whispers of prejudice, the media stories that painted every Italian as a criminal. All of it came together like pieces of a quiet puzzle. Italy had given America music, cuisine, art, labor, soldiers, thinkers, dreamers. Yet old stereotypes still clung like shadows. Joe wanted to fight that, not through fear or manipulation, but through something no dawn before him had even imagined. Public movement. A movement that would defend Italian-American dignity, confront discrimination, and challenge the idea that every Italian was connected to the mafia. It was a dream born not of ego, but of identity. A dream that would soon grow far bigger than Joe anticipated. When Joe first shared the idea with his closest captains, the room fell quiet, not with tension, but with uncertainty. "No dawn goes public," one murmured softly. "Not even a little," another added. "It's not our way." Joe nodded calmly. "I'm not talking about exposing us," he said in his steady voice. "I'm talking about protecting our people, our name, our children's futures." The men listened, leaning back in their chairs, absorbing the words slowly. Joe wasn't asking them to reveal secrets. He wasn't asking them to take risks. He wasn't asking them to step into the spotlight. He simply wanted to defend Italian Americans against unfair treatment, peacefully, legally, respectfully. And for that reason, most of the men eventually agreed. "He's doing it for the community," one said later. "He's got a good heart," said another. But in the corners of the room, in the quiet shadows where old traditions sat comfortably, some were unsure. Some feared Joe's dream would cross lines that had been drawn generations before. Lines that once crossed could never be undone. Joe didn't launch his movement loudly. He didn't call the newspapers. He didn't run through the streets shouting slogans. He started softly, a meeting in a church basement, a few community leaders, some lawyers, some local families, quiet voices raised not in anger, but in longing for dignity. What started as a small gathering grew steadily, hundreds attending, then thousands, then tens of thousands. Soon, the Italian-American Civil Rights League was born. It wasn't a criminal organization. It wasn't a political campaign. It was a community movement, peaceful, structured, hopeful. Joe spoke rarely, and when he did, his tone was calm. "We are Americans," he told a crowd in his gentle manner. "We work hard. We raise families. We contribute to this country. And we deserve the same respect as anyone else." His words weren't fiery. They weren't dramatic. They were simple, relatable, soothing. And people listened. Newspapers began covering the League. Television stations filmed its rallies. Celebrities, politicians, and church leaders expressed support. For the first time in decades, Italian Americans had a national voice, and to many, Joe Colombo looked like a leader fighting for justice. But with attention came questions. Reporters wondered who the soft-spoken man behind the movement was. Authorities wondered whether a quiet Don could really be this public without a hidden agenda. And the other crime families worried this attention might spill over into places they didn't want light shining. Yet Joe continued calm as always. He visited community centers. He spoke to young people about pride in their heritage. He organized peaceful protests against unjust portrayals in films and news stories. He became, in a strange and unprecedented way, a public figure. Don, standing in daylight, speaking into microphones, smiling for cameras, something no one had ever seen before. While the community celebrated Joe, some of the men in organized crime began to worry. They didn't dislike Joe. They respected him. They admired his calmness and his leadership, but they feared the attention he attracted. When a Don becomes a symbol, the spotlight follows, and the world watching him might eventually see things they shouldn't. In dark rooms across the city, hushed conversations started to unfold. He's changing too much. He's bringing cameras near places that prefer shadows. He's exposing us, even if he doesn't mean to. Joe didn't hear these conversations, not directly, but he sensed a shift in the air, subtle as the change in seasons. Some men had begun to view his dream not as a blessing, but as a risk. Yet Joe remained steady. He believed deeply in his cause. And belief, especially when calm and sincere, can be powerful, but also dangerous. As months passed, Joe found himself balancing two identities, one old, one new. By day, he was the soft-spoken leader of a civil rights movement. By night, he remained the quiet head of a powerful crime family. To the public, he was a champion of Italian-American dignity. To his men, he was a steady presence keeping the family peaceful. And in the space between, Joe felt a growing weight. He never wanted fame. He never wanted power. He wanted fairness. He wanted respect. He wanted the next generation to live without stereotypes. But the Mafia world followed rules older than Joe himself. Rules about silence, invisibility, and respect earned in shadows, not spotlights. And those rules did not bend easily. Not even for a man as calm and unusual as Joe Colombo. With the movement growing and attention rising, the world around Joe began to shift. Gently at first, but soon, like a quiet wave slowly gathering strength. The peace Joe built was about to be tested in ways he never expected. The city settles again into its evening hush. Windows glow faintly in the distance. Car engines murmur their way down long avenues, and a gentle wind slips through New York like a careful whisper. This is where we return to Joe Colombo, a man who walked with one foot in the shadows and the other in a growing spotlight. A Don unlike any before him. Tonight's chapter takes us deeper into the moment Joe began doing the unthinkable, living part of his life openly, publicly, confidently, not as a criminal leader, but as the face of a peaceful movement. A man trying to reshape the reputation of his people. A Don who, for the first time in Mafia history, stepped forward into the light. It happened on a warm afternoon, the kind where the sun gently warms the pavement and the breeze feels like a quiet invitation. Joe Colombo walked up the steps of a community building, surrounded not by bodyguards or capos, but by families. Young children holding balloons, elderly parents leaning on their canes, teenagers wearing fresh white shirts with pride. The media had arrived early, setting up microphones, adjusting lenses, murmuring among themselves. Everyone wanted to know, who was Joe Colombo? And why was he launching a civil rights movement? When Joe stepped to the podium, the reporters fell into a soft silence. Joe was not the typical loud, fiery leader seen at rallies. He wasn't dramatic. He didn't pound the podium. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he spoke slowly, calmly, letting each sentence land with gentle clarity. "We are hardworking Americans," he said, his voice steady. "We raise families. We pay our taxes. We contribute to this country. We deserve to be treated with fairness and dignity." There was no anger in his tone. No aggression. Just sincerity, soft and unmistakable. Cameras clicked, capturing the unusual sight of a man from a secretive world speaking openly, peacefully, confidently. And that moment sent ripples far beyond the crowd. Within days, newspapers across the country published the story. Some headlines praised him. Colombo leads fight against stereotyping. New voice for Italian-American rights. Other headlines questioned him. Who is Joe Colombo? Is this man really a civil rights leader? People were curious. He didn't look like a politician. He didn't sound like one either. He had a gentleness that made him approachable, but a firmness that made him respectable. Italian-American families began writing letters to the League. Mothers who felt their sons were mistreated. Workers who felt overlooked. Students who felt burdened by stereotypes. Joe read many of the letters personally. He was touched by the quiet pain hidden in simple words like, "Thank you. We finally feel seen. My father would be proud." Joe realized his movement wasn't just an idea anymore. It was becoming a voice for people who had never been heard. But with that voice came attention. And attention is rarely gentle. Behind closed doors in federal buildings, law enforcement officials gathered to discuss the rise of the Italian-American Civil Rights League. They didn't see Joe the way the community did. They didn't see him as a peaceful organizer or a symbol of hope. They saw him as a problem. A Don standing in front of cameras? A Mafia leader giving public speeches? A man from the underworld mobilizing thousands? To them, this was dangerous, unpredictable, unprecedented. Agents began digging into his background, quietly, carefully. Officials began making phone calls, curious, concerned. And surveillance teams started following the movement respectfully but persistently. Joe wasn't surprised. He understood the government's instinct, but he believed openness was the path forward. If the community saw him, if the cameras saw him, if the world saw him, then maybe the shadows would finally stop defining people like him. It was a hopeful belief, a sincere one, but hope can invite challenges. While the public discussed Joe with curiosity, and the government watched him with caution, the other Mafia families watched him with something deeper, unease. The 5 families had thrived for decades in silence. Hidden networks, quiet meetings, invisible power. And suddenly, here was Joe, soft-spoken, calm, polite, doing the opposite of everything tradition demanded. A Don speaking on television. A Don building a public movement. A Don meeting politicians, priests, activists. Men who had lived by the old rules began to whisper behind closed doors. "He's attracting too much attention. This could bring heat on all of us. What if someone starts digging?" These were not angry whispers, just cautious ones, like wind brushing through tall grass. Joe sensed their concern. He heard the soft warnings from allies, but he kept going. Not because he wanted fame, but because he truly believed he was helping his people. One of the most remarkable scenes of Joe's public life came during a peaceful march in Manhattan. Thousands of Italian Americans moved through the streets, holding flags, banners, and signs calling for fair representation. There were no threats, no violence, no anger, just pride. Elderly grandmothers in black dresses walked slowly, arm in arm. Young boys waved tiny tricolor flags. Workers carried banners painted in careful handwriting. Musicians played soft Italian melodies that echoed through the tall buildings. Joe walked in the middle of the crowd, not at the front. He didn't want to appear as a ruler. He wanted to be part of the community. People walked beside him, some placing gentle hands on his shoulder. Others thanked him softly. Some simply nodded, grateful. To many, Joe Colombo wasn't a Don. He was a guardian, a symbol, a calm presence in a world of stereotypes. It was a beautiful moment, but beauty, in the shadows of organized crime, can attract envy, or fear, or danger. A few weeks later, a major rally took place at Columbus Circle. The crowd was enormous. Tens of thousands gathered peacefully. When Joe stepped onto the stage, the applause rose gently, like a wave rolling across the shore. He lifted his hand in a soft, relaxed salute. Not a political gesture, not a proud declaration, just a quiet acknowledgement. And the crowd fell silent. Joe looked out at them slowly, letting the moment breathe. His voice, when it came, was gentle as always. "We are here today because we want fairness," he said. "We want dignity, not just for us, but for the next generation." He paused, letting the words settle over the crowd like falling snow. "This movement is not about me," he continued. "It is about all of you, and the respect every one of us deserves." The audience listened with a calm focus. The city listened. Even the government listened. But in small rooms filled with older men who valued secrecy, Joe's calm speech carried a different meaning. A Don on a stage, leading thousands? This had never happened before, and not everyone was comfortable with it. In quiet apartments across the boroughs, respected figures met privately to discuss Joe's rising visibility. No shouting, no threats, just steady, concerned voices. "He's changing things. He means well, but this attention, it's dangerous. We follow rules. He's bending them." Some men believed Joe was doing something noble. Others believed he was risking too much. Many were torn, admiring his courage, fearing the consequences. Even within Joe's own family, some captains whispered, "We're getting too visible. The other families are worried. The feds are watching everything." Joe listened to these concerns when they reached him. He didn't dismiss them. He didn't get angry. He simply said, "We are doing good. We are helping people. And good things sometimes make others uncomfortable." But Joe was not naive. He knew the path he walked was narrow, a balancing act. Joe would attend events quietly, shaking hands, listening to concerns, reassuring people with that calm, steady tone he carried like a shield. He didn't walk like a Don. He didn't talk like one. He didn't carry the aura of intimidation. Instead, he moved through crowds like a gentle guardian, steady, peaceful, confident in a quiet way. But while the public saw a hero, the shadows saw a disturbance. In dimly lit apartments and back rooms of small social clubs, the older bosses gathered. Some sat with arms folded, their faces calm but eyes serious. Some stirred their espresso slowly, thinking. Some leaned back in silence, their expressions unreadable. Joe was one of their own, young, talented, respected, but he was doing something no one had imagined, creating a public movement, drawing cameras, drawing headlines, drawing crowds, and where cameras go, questions follow. Where crowds gather, attention grows, and where attention grows, danger often isn't far behind. One respected elder put it softly, "He means well, but this is not how our world works. A Don does not live in the light." Another replied just as calmly, "He's bringing the heat of 1,000 eyes. The public sees him, the feds see him, and soon, someone will make a move." There was no anger in their voices, just worry, just caution, just fear of what attention might bring. As whispers grew, Joe's demeanor never changed. He still arrived early to community meetings. He still met with local families quietly. He still guided his crime family with a gentle hand. He still believed deeply that he could help Italian Americans reclaim their dignity. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't careless. He wasn't blind. He simply believed that doing the right thing sometimes meant walking into uncomfortable places. But even Joe, with all his calmness, could feel something shifting around him. Joe nodded. He appreciated the warning. He understood it. But he also understood something else. He couldn't abandon the people who trusted him. One day, during a quiet league meeting, Joe was pulled aside by a young organizer. Nervous, breathless, concerned. "There's someone new asking questions," the organizer whispered. "Someone who isn't part of the movement." Joe raised an eyebrow gently. "Who?" he asked softly. "A man who won't give his name. He's been at every meeting this week. Watching, listening, not speaking." Joe didn't panic. He didn't grow suspicious. He simply nodded calmly. "Keep an eye on him," he said. "No need to worry yet." The organizer nodded and left. Joe leaned back in his chair, deep in thought. Was it a reporter? A government agent? A curious outsider? Or something else entirely? He didn't know. But he sensed the subtle shift in the atmosphere, like a soft breeze turning just slightly colder. In another part of the city, in a back room of a quiet social club, a small group of men gathered without ceremony. They spoke softly. They spoke slowly. They spoke with tired concern. "Joe's a good man," one said. "Sure," another answered. "But he's putting himself in danger, and maybe us too." A man at the table sighed heavily. "We can't stop him," he said. "He won't listen. He believes in what he's doing." Silence filled the room for a long moment. Then someone said something that felt like a whisper carried on wind. "If he keeps going like this, something bad will happen. Maybe not by our hand. Maybe by someone else's. But it will happen." The others didn't respond. They didn't agree. But they didn't disagree either. It was the kind of silence that felt like the beginning of something, but no one yet knew what. At home, Joe's wife and children noticed that life had begun to shift. Phone calls came at odd hours. Strangers lingered near meetings. Security around the rallies grew thicker. Yet Joe remained gentle with his family. He would sit with his children at night, reading to them in a calm voice. He would kiss his wife's forehead softly before leaving for events. He would reassure them, always with the same words. It will be okay. He believed it. He wanted to believe it. But even calm men can feel the tremors of what's coming. Joe sensed something approaching, something neither he nor anyone around him could yet name. The night before the Italian-American Unity Day rally, Joe sat alone in his living room. No noise, no music, just the dim glow of a lamp. He thought about the movement, the people he had helped, the pride he had restored, the tension he had created, the risks ahead. He felt a strange mix of peace and heaviness, as if he were standing at the edge of something important. He sipped his coffee slowly, closed his eyes for a moment, and whispered to himself, "Whatever happens next, I stand by what I believe." Outside, the city slept quietly. Inside, Joe felt the weight of both worlds pressing softly against his shoulders. The shadows were moving. The light was watching. And Joe Colombo walked calmly between them, unaware of the moment that soon would change everything. The night has grown still again. Lights from the city fade into a gentle glow, and the world seems to breathe a little slower. It is in this quiet hour that we return to the final chapter of Joe Colombo's story. A man who never fit the mold of the underworld he led. A man who dreamed too boldly, too openly, and whose path ended not with a loud confrontation, but with a whisper of fate at his back. Tonight, the story concludes. It was June 28th, 1971, a warm summer day. Sunlight poured across Manhattan like liquid gold. The air was thick with heat, but alive with excitement, because the Italian-American Civil Rights League had assembled one of its largest rallies yet. Thousands of people gathered in Columbus Circle. Families, workers, grandparents with folding chairs, little kids with flags and water bottles. It felt more like a festival than a protest. Music played softly through speakers. Vendors shouted about cold drinks. And everywhere you looked, signs fluttered with messages of pride and unity. For Joe Colombo, this day was meant to be a celebration, a symbol of how far they'd come. A message to America that Italian Americans were more than the stereotypes written by newspapers and Hollywood scripts. Joe moved calmly through the crowd, shaking hands, kissing cheeks, greeting people who had traveled from across the country to be part of this movement. He smiled often. He lingered on each conversation. He made everyone feel seen. He was not a hidden don today, not a shadowy figure, not a name whispered behind closed doors. He was a public leader, standing under the sun, surrounded by the people he cared so deeply about. And yet, somewhere in that crowd, a quiet threat was moving toward him. As Joe reached the front of the stage area, a young man walked toward him. He carried a camera. Nothing strange in a crowd full of reporters, photographers, and families taking pictures. The young man looked nervous. His hand trembled slightly. His eyes were wide, almost as if he were overwhelmed by the sheer size of the gathering. A few people noticed him, but no one thought much of it. Joe saw him approach. He gave the man the same smile he gave everyone else, warm, calm, patient. He didn't know the man's name. He didn't know the man wasn't a photographer. He didn't know that under the camera shell was a gun. And then, in one instant, the peace of the morning was shattered. Flash. A sound that split the warm air. A sharp, violent crack that echoed across Columbus Circle. People screamed. Birds scattered into the sky. Crowds ducked, fell, and scrambled for cover. Joe Colombo staggered. His body failed him all at once, and the world went quiet inside his mind, as if someone had suddenly put a hand over the speakers of life. The young man with the fake camera was tackled immediately. Someone yelled that he wasn't alone. Chaos spread like fire on dry leaves. But for Joe, there was only a soft sinking sensation, a feeling of slipping backward into himself. He didn't fall hard. He didn't collapse in a dramatic way. He simply folded gently to the ground, as though he were laying down to rest after a long day. News traveled fast. Headlines screamed. Politicians weighed in. Federal investigators swarmed every corner of the story. Some said the attack was ordered from inside the underworld, by enemies who believed Joe had crossed an invisible line. Some said it was a rogue act. Others said it was fallout from Joe's public activism. But inside the Colombo home, all that mattered was that Joe was alive, but unable to speak, move independently, or return to the world he loved. Doctors said he was in a state between waking and dreaming. He would open his eyes sometimes. He would look around the room, but the spark, the gentle, steady fire that had guided him through life had dimmed. His wife, Lucille, visited every day. She talked to him as though he were still the man who walked with purpose through Brooklyn streets. She held his hand, brushed his hair, adjusted his pillows, and whispered old memories into his ears. His sons, who had followed him into the movement, kept the League alive for years, still carrying the message their father had believed in so deeply. Joe stayed between worlds. His room was quiet. His breaths were soft and slow. He didn't speak, but his presence filled the space, like a figure resting beside a window as sunlight drifted across the floor. No pain, no alarms, just a peaceful departure, like a tide rolling back into the ocean. The world he left behind was vastly different from the one he tried to reshape. The Mafia had retreated further into the shadows. Hollywood had grown louder. Stereotypes had tightened their grip again. But something remained, a legacy not of crime, nor of violence, but of a man who believed genuinely, passionately, that his heritage could stand proudly in the sunlight. Joe Colombo had tried to do something extraordinary. He tried to humanize his people. He tried to speak for them. He tried to change how they were seen. And for a brief moment, he succeeded. Joe Colombo remains one of the most unusual figures in American crime history. Not because of power, not because of wealth, not because of violence, but because he was gentle where others were harsh, calm where others were reckless, hopeful where others were cynical, public where others hid. He believed the Mafia could be a family, truly a family, with values deeper than money and fear. He believed Italian Americans deserved dignity. He believed in community more than secrecy. He believed in fairness more than intimidation. He believed in sunlight over shadows. And in the end, his belief made him both a symbol and a target. His story is not a warning, not a fable, not a moral lesson. It is simply the journey of a man who tried something different, something gentler, something far more difficult than violence. He tried to unite people. As the night grows softer, as the world outside quiets itself, as your breath falls into a slow, steady rhythm, let the memory of Joe Colombo rest gently in your mind. A boy from Brooklyn, a leader who listened, a Don who carried hope, a man who dreamed in daylight, and who left behind a story that whispers instead of shouts. His name may carry controversy. His choices may carry contradictions. But his heart, the calm, patient heart that shaped his life, remains unmistakable.